It was a rainy morning in the bustling city. The busy streets reflected the typical urban chaos, with cars honking and pedestrians rushing to find shelter from the rain. In the city center, the courthouse, known for handling the most controversial and important cases, was more agitated than usual. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Lawyers in expensive suits murmured to each other and reviewed documents. In the center of the room, Judge Robert Miller, a 60-year-old man known for his rigid demeanor and impatience with formalities outside of protocol, reviewed the day's cases. He had a striking presence, neatly combed gray hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and an expression that seemed perpetually furrowed, betraying his natural skepticism. It was into this charged atmosphere that David Smith entered. He could not have been more out of place among those present. He was a thin, young man of about 17, wearing a simple dress shirt and a pair of worn-out shoes. He carried a black backpack that seemed heavy, but held it firmly. Despite his simple appearance, David kept his head held high and his posture straight. All eyes immediately turned to him. Whispers began to circulate around the room. "Who is this kid? What is he doing here?" some of those present said. The contrast between him and the suited lawyers could not have been starker. David walked to a bench at the back of the room and sat down, ignoring the curious glances. Soon after, Judge Miller struck his gavel, calling the hearing to order. His voice echoed with authority in the room. "Let's begin the trial of the case of Johnson versus Agron, a legal dispute over land in the interior of the state. I request the presence of the attorney representing the plaintiff." For a moment there was silence. Then David Smith stood up. With measured steps, he walked to the center of the room. With each step, the murmurs grew louder. When he reached the podium, he placed his backpack on the floor and said firmly, "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is David Smith, and I am the attorney representing Ms. Sandra White." The room fell into complete silence. The lawyers exchanged looks of disbelief, and Judge Miller himself stopped flipping through his papers to observe the young man. He adjusted his glasses and looked at David with a mixture of astonishment and disdain. "Excuse me, are you saying you are Ms. Sandra White's attorney? This is a real hearing, young man. We are not in a theater rehearsal." "Where is the real attorney?" David remained calm, his voice controlled. "Your Honor, I am Ms. White's attorney. I am here to represent her according to the law." Judge Miller chuckled, a short, dry laugh that soon turned into sarcasm. "This must be a joke. Who gave this child permission to enter here as an attorney?" He looked around, seeking support in the equally perplexed expressions of those present. "Come on, kid. This is not a park to play attorney." At that moment, a voice sounded from the back of the room. It was Sandra White, an elderly woman of humble appearance. She stood up and said firmly, "He is my attorney, Your Honor. He was the one who agreed to defend me when no one else would." Judge Miller narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed. He struck his gavel to silence the murmurs and asked David Smith to present his credentials. The young man opened his backpack, took out a sealed envelope, and handed it to the court official. When the official passed the documents to the judge, the atmosphere became silent again, with everyone watching intently as the judge analyzed the papers. His expression gradually changed from disbelief to surprise. He looked at David and for the first time spoke without sarcasm. "Well, it seems your documents are in order. You are indeed a licensed attorney. But tell me, young man, how did someone your age achieve this?" David looked at the judge serenely and replied, "With a lot of study, Your Honor, but I am not here to talk about myself. I'm here to defend my client." The judge was momentarily speechless, but soon regained his composure and announced, "Very well, since you insist, you may present your case, but I warn you now, expect no leniency from me." David nodded, returned to the podium, and began to organize his papers. The room was still immersed in murmurs, but he, oblivious to everything, knew he needed to prove not only to the judge, but to everyone there that he was up to the challenge. David Smith was born and raised in a large, underserved community. He was the only child of Ms. Ann, a hard-working woman who raised the boy alone since David's father abandoned them when he was a baby. Ms. Ann worked as a cleaner, cleaning houses in wealthy neighborhoods, and often left before dawn and only returned late at night, exhausted but determined to give her son a better future. From an early age, David showed he was different. While other children played in the streets, he preferred to spend hours reading the few books his mother brought home, often found in the trash or given by people she worked for. When he started attending the neighborhood public school, he quickly caught the attention of teachers for his intelligence and curiosity. He not only learned quickly, but had a thirst for knowledge that impressed everyone. Around the age of 9, David began to show an exceptional talent for solving mathematical problems and a unique ability with words. One of his teachers, Mr. Thomas, noticed the boy's potential and began to help him, bringing him books and more advanced materials for him to study. "David, you have something special, kid. Never let anyone convince you otherwise," the teacher would say. At 12, David participated in a regional writing competition and took first place, surpassing students from private and renowned schools. His text, titled "The Right to Dream," spoke about the reality of communities and the importance of fighting for justice. The text attracted so much attention that a local journalist wrote an article about him, which ended up changing his life. Because of this visibility, David received a full scholarship to an elite high school in the city. But this achievement came with challenges. In the new environment, he was constantly a target of prejudice. Many classmates from wealthy families mocked his humble origin and the fact that he was the only black student in the class. "What are you doing here?" he once heard from a colleague. "This place is not for people like you." David, however, never allowed these words to shake him. He knew he was there by merit and that his presence was only uncomfortable because it challenged stereotypes. "No matter what they think," his mother would say when she saw him dejected on some nights, "you are my pride, my genius, and you will go much further than they imagine." During his years at school, David excelled in all subjects, but had a special passion for debates. He became president of the debate club and began participating in state competitions, always defending themes related to equity and social justice. It was at this time that he decided he wanted to be a lawyer. "I want to help people like us, Mom. I want to fight for the people no one listens to," he said one night while studying. At 15, David was accepted into a special advanced studies program that allowed him to complete high school and start law school in an accelerated manner. He attended public university during the day and studied late into the night at home, always determined to achieve his goal. When he graduated at just 17, he received special recognition from the university for his brilliant academic performance. But even after graduating, the challenges continued. Finding opportunities in the legal market as a young black man from a humble background was not easy. He spent months submitting resumes and facing disdainful looks, but David did not give up. He knew that his greatest weapon was his knowledge and his determination. That's why when Ms. Sandra White, a longtime neighbor of his mother, sought legal help, David did not hesitate to accept the case, even knowing it would be difficult. Ms. White was facing a dispute against a large company that claimed to have rights over the land where she and her family had lived for decades. Without money to hire renowned lawyers, she trusted David, the boy who had grown up next to her and was now a trained lawyer. "Do you believe you can help me, David?" Ms. White asked with tears in her eyes. "I don't just believe, Ms. White, I know I can," he replied determinedly. Thus, David Smith decided that this would be the first battle of many. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but as in his whole life, he was willing to fight against adversity. It was the day of the hearing. The courthouse was busy. Experienced lawyers paraded with their leather briefcases, clients waited anxiously, and the air was charged with formality. In the middle of this crowd, David Smith, entered the courtroom alongside Ms. Sandra White. He was wearing the best he had, a blue dress shirt, simple black pants, and a pair of shoes his mother had managed to repair especially for the occasion. As soon as David entered the room, all eyes turned to him, first curiosity, then incredulity. After all, who was this simple-looking young black man to be in such an imposing environment? Ms. White walked beside him, her hands trembling, but David's confident expression comforted her. Judge Robert Miller, already seated in his position of authority, observed the movements. His look was known for its severity, and he tolerated nothing that strayed from the strict formalities of the court. "I request that the legal representatives present themselves," he announced in a severe tone. A brief silence filled the room, and then David Smith stood up. With firm steps, he walked to the podium. The sound of his footsteps seemed to echo amidst the murmurs that arose as soon as he began to speak. "Your Honor, my name is David Smith. I am the attorney representing Ms. Sandra White," he said with a clear and firm voice. The room was filled with momentary silence, followed by muffled laughter and surprised glances. The lawyers present whispered among themselves, some clearly amused by what they believed to be a joke. Judge Miller adjusted his glasses and narrowed his eyes as if to confirm what he had heard. He crossed his hands and leaned slightly forward. "Excuse me, young man. Are you saying you are Ms. Sandra White's attorney?" he asked, with a tone laden with sarcasm. "Yes, sir," David replied without hesitation. Judge Miller let out a dry laugh and looked around the room as if seeking complicity from others. "This must be a joke. How can a boy your age be here posing as an attorney? Where is the real attorney?" Ms. White, sitting in the back, stood up with a mixture of fear and determination. "He is my attorney, Your Honor. He was the only one who agreed to help me when no one else would." The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued but also irritated. "Well, if that's the case, young man, I hope you have proof of your qualification. We are not here to play lawyers." David calmly opened his backpack, took out a sealed envelope, and handed it to the court official. Silence filled the room as the official took the documents to the judge. During this moment, David maintained an upright posture, facing the judge with serenity. When Judge Miller opened the envelope and began to review the documents, his expression gradually changed. He went from skeptical to serious, and finally to surprised. The room seemed to hold its breath as they awaited the final verification. "Well, from what I see here, you really are a licensed attorney. You are registered with the Bar Association and everything seems to be in order," the judge said, adjusting his glasses again. He paused and looked at David. "But tell me, how did someone your age achieve this? This is not at all common." David did not let himself be intimidated. He took a deep breath and replied, "Your Honor, my mother always taught me that with effort and dedication, anything is possible. I studied hard, passed the exams, and met all the requirements. I am here today, committed not to what is on trial today, but to ensure that justice is served." Judge Miller frowned, clearly challenged by the young man's confidence. "Very well. If you are so confident, you may continue. But know that I expect nothing less than professionalism here. I will not make concessions because of your age or anything else." David nodded calmly, returned to the podium, and began to organize his papers. All eyes were still on him, some with disdain, others with surprise. Even under all that pressure, he maintained his composure. He knew the biggest test was yet to come. Ms. White watched him from the back bench, her hands still trembling but with a new hope shining in her eyes. She knew David was young, but she also knew he was her best chance against the powerful Agron Company. With Judge Miller's permission, David Smith adjusted his papers on the podium, maintaining a firm posture. The room was still filled with murmurs, but he seemed immune to any distraction. The case he was defending was delicate. Ms. Sandra White, a humble elderly woman, was facing a dispute with Agron, a powerful agricultural company that claimed to own the land where she and her family had lived for more than 30 years. David began his presentation with a clear and objective voice. "Your Honor, today I represent a citizen who has dedicated her entire life to work and family. The land in question has belonged to Ms. Sandra White since it was acquired by her deceased husband, but it is now being unjustly claimed by a company that uses its influence and power to try to take it from her." He held up a document he had previously separated. "Here is the original property deed that shows Ms. Sandra White and her family have owned the land since 1992. David began distributing copies of the document, calmly explaining every technical detail. He cited relevant articles of the Civil Code related to property rights and presented evidence that Agron was trying to manipulate documents to invalidate the elderly woman's legitimate possession. As he spoke, his argumentation was clear and precise. He did not use elaborate or complicated words, but he managed to be technical enough to impress even those who had smiled with disdain when he first presented himself. They began to pay attention. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he continued, holding up another paper, "here is an independent expert report that confirms the documents presented by Agron have irregularities. There are clear indications of alteration in the signature of the alleged original seller. This evidence confirms that the company's intention was to defraud my client's right of possession." Judge Miller, who initially barely hid his disdain, began to lean back in his chair, analyzing the documents more carefully. He gestured to Agron's attorney, who immediately stood up. "With all due respect, Your Honor," began the company's attorney, Mark Davis, a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit and a condescending smile. "This case is more complex than Mr. Smith tries to make it seem. Agron acquired the land legitimately, and all documentation is regularized. Furthermore, I must say that the defense presented by him lacks experience." He cast a superior glance at David before continuing. "This young attorney may be dedicated, but he clearly oversimplifies a matter that involves deep legal nuances. We are not here for emotional speeches. We are here to analyze legal facts." David listened calmly, without interrupting. When Mark finished, the judge looked at David and gestured for him to respond. "I appreciate the defense's point," David said in a firm but respectful tone. "However, I insist that what we are presenting are objective facts. The evidence I submitted to this court shows that Ms. Sandra White has legitimate possession of the land, and the irregularities in the documents presented by Agron are clear. The issue is not about experience, but about justice." The room was filled with a slight murmur. David's calm and direct response had surprised some. He then continued, "We cannot ignore that Agron's economic power is being used as a weapon to intimidate an ordinary citizen, someone who does not have the same financial resources or influence. This court exists to protect the vulnerable and ensure that no one is deprived of their rights." David went on to present testimonies from neighbors who corroborated Ms. White's continuous presence on the land since the 1990s, as well as additional documents that reinforced her legal possession. Each point was defended with clarity and objectivity, as if he had been born to be there. Attorney Mark tried to interrupt him several times with technical questions, but David answered each of them calmly, showing that he had done his homework. Little by little, even those who had underestimated him began to recognize that he was not just a talented young man, he was a prepared professional. Judge Miller, who until then had observed with skepticism, began to ask questions. David answered each of them with precision, making it clear that he knew not only the case, but also the legal foundations necessary to defend it. "Very well, Mr. Smith," the judge finally said. "I must admit that your argumentation is very well founded, but I still have a doubt. If the possession of the property is as clear as you say, why did this case come to court?" David took a deep breath and replied, "Your Honor, The case came to this court because Agron used its influence and resources to create delays in the process and pressure my client to give up. But Ms. Sandra White did not give up, and I am here to ensure that justice prevails. David's direct answer seemed to impress the judge. He nodded slowly, and the murmur in the room intensified. Even Mark Davis seemed uncomfortable with David's confidence. But David knew the battle was far from over. He had gained the court's attention, but now he needed to ensure his evidence was sufficient to win the case. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. After David Smith's meticulous presentation, all eyes were fixed on the young attorney. He had gained Judge Robert Miller's attention and challenged the experienced defense of Mark Davis, who now seemed more tense than confident. But the most decisive moment was yet to come. Mr. Davis, the court grants the defense the opportunity to present any additional evidence or contest what has been presented so far, the judge declared with a neutral but attentive tone. Mark Davis, in an effort to regain ground, stood up and adjusted his glasses with his fingertips. He paused as if carefully calculating each word. Your Honor, I would like to emphasize that this case is not as simple as Mr. Smith tries to make it seem. Although he has shown himself to be very articulate, the central issue here is the authenticity of the documents presented by both parties. And as we know, a deep technical knowledge and experience are required to deal with these nuances. He cast another condescending look at David, trying to destabilize him. With all due respect, Your Honor, we must ask ourselves if Mr. Smith truly understands the complexity of this case, or if we are facing a well-rehearsed but empty speech. The tension in the room was palpable. Judge Miller looked at David and gestured for him to respond. David took a deep breath, controlling the emotions that arose within him. He knew that Mark Davis was not just questioning his evidence, he was questioning his legitimacy, something David had faced throughout his life. Your Honor, David began, his voice calm but charged with emotion, my job here is to present facts, and the facts clearly show that the documents presented by Agron contain serious irregularities. This is not a rehearsed speech, as the defense implied, but concrete evidence that has been verified by experts. He picked up one of the documents and walked towards the projection screen in the courtroom. Allow me to highlight once again the inconsistencies in the signature of the alleged seller here. He pointed to the signature. We see a glaring difference between this signature and other authenticated signatures of the same individual. This is more than an irregularity, it is evidence of bad faith. Silence filled the room as David explained every detail, using technical language sufficient to impress the court but clear enough for everyone to understand. He cited specific articles of the Civil Code, reinforcing that document manipulation constituted an attempt at fraud. More than that, Your Honor, David continued, now turning to the judge, this case is not just about documents or property. It is about a basic principle of justice. My client, Ms. Sandra White, dedicated her life to this land. She raised her children here, planted trees, cared for the land. It is not just a piece of ground for her, it is her family's history. David paused, letting his words resonate in the room before concluding, Your Honor, what is on trial here is more than property. It is the dignity of an ordinary citizen who trusted the legal system to protect her. Judge Miller rested his chin in one hand. Thoughtful, he seemed to evaluate not only David's words, but also the impact they had on the case. When Mark Davis tried to speak again, the judge raised his hand, indicating he should wait. Mr. Davis, I will take some time to review the evidence presented by both parties before making my decision. This court will recess for 1 hour. As the judge left the room, the murmuring returned. Many of those present began to discuss the strength of David's arguments. Some older lawyers who had initially laughed at him now looked at the young man with respect. Ms. White approached David and held his hand. Thank you, my son. No matter what happens, you have already done more for me than I could have imagined. David smiled, squeezing her hand. Ms. White, We are not done yet. We will go all the way." After the break, the court resumed. Judge Miller entered with a serious expression and sat down. He struck his gavel, asking for silence. After carefully analyzing the evidence presented and hearing the arguments of both parties, this court has reached a decision. The authenticity of the documents presented by Agron has been seriously questioned, while the evidence brought by the plaintiff was consistent and well-founded. Therefore, I rule in favor of Ms. Sandra White. The property remains in her name. The room exploded in murmurs and exclamations of surprise. Ms. White began to cry tears of joy and hugged David tightly. The judge then looked directly at David and for the first time spoke in a softer tone. "Mr. Smith, I must admit that initially I had serious doubts about your ability, but today you proved that talent and dedication can overcome any prejudice. This court thanks you for reminding us of the true purpose of justice." David nodded, visibly moved but maintaining his composure. He knew that moment was more than a judicial victory. It was a milestone in his fight against the prejudices he had always faced. Judge Robert Miller's verdict echoed in the minds of everyone present in the courtroom. The young attorney David Smith had not only won the case, but also changed the perception of those who initially doubted him. David Smith's name was already beginning to be whispered in the courthouse corridors, not only as a talented attorney, but as a symbol of determination and overcoming. Ms. Sandra White, still emotional, wiped away tears as she thanked the young man. "You didn't just save my house, David. You saved my history, my family's legacy. May God bless you, my son." David smiled, his eyes welling up, but maintained his professional demeanor. "Ms. White, your struggle is that of many people. I just did what was right, and I want to continue doing that for everyone who needs it." As he collected his papers, several lawyers who had previously ignored him began to approach, congratulating him. Even Mr. Davis, the experienced attorney from Agron, came up to David with a more humble expression. "I must admit, Smith, I underestimated you. Today I learned a lesson I will never forget," Mr. Davis said, extending his hand. David shook his hand and replied humbly, "We are all here to learn, Mr. Davis. I appreciate the opportunity to defend my client." In the days that followed, David Smith's story began to circulate in local newspapers and on social media. Articles highlighted the young attorney from the underserved community who faced giants in court. The story quickly gained traction, inspiring young people across the country who saw themselves reflected in David. Messages began to reach him through social media. One of them, from a young woman named Lily, caught his attention. "David, my family lives in a difficult situation, and sometimes I feel like my dreams of studying and changing our reality are impossible. But after hearing your story, I realized that we can't give up. Thank you for being an inspiration." David responded to each message, encouraging young people to persist in their dreams and believe that education is the key to transforming realities. With the repercussion of the case, David decided to go a step further. He created a project called Justice for All that offered free legal assistance to low-income people and mentorships for young people interested in the field of law. In partnership with volunteer lawyers and universities, the project began organizing workshops in underserved communities, showing young people that knowledge could be a powerful weapon against injustices. During the project's first event, David spoke to a group of young people and adults. "I too have been underestimated. I've been told that my place was not here, but I proved that our place is where we fight for it. I want you to know that you are capable, that you have value, and that you can change your stories." Months after the case, David received an unexpected call. Judge Robert Miller invited him to an event at the courthouse. Upon arriving, David was surprised by a ceremony in his honor. The judge, with a less severe demeanor, spoke before an audience of lawyers, judges, and students. "When I met Mr. Smith, I admit I was skeptical, But today, I can say with pride that he taught me something fundamental. Justice is not measured by the age or origin of whoever defends it. This young man is an example of what we should all seek in our profession. The judge presented David with a plaque of recognition with the words, "For your dedication to justice and for the inspiration you brought to many." Despite the recognition, David never forgot who always believed in him, his mother. On a quiet afternoon, he returned home with a bouquet of flowers and the recognition plaque in his hands. Miss Anne, who was waiting with a proud smile, hugged him with tears in her eyes. "This is for you, Mom," David said, handing her the plaque. "None of this would be possible without you." Miss Anne replied, "I always knew you were special, my son, but the most beautiful thing of all is the heart you have, not just for what you do, but for why you do it." As the years passed, David Smith continued his brilliant career as a lawyer and mentor. His story was not just about winning a case, but about breaking barriers, inspiring change, and showing that talent and determination have no color, age, or origin. In an interview for a TV program, David summarized his journey with words that resonated throughout the country. "Justice for me is not just a profession, it is a mission. And each of us has the power to make a difference, however small it may seem. My story is just the beginning. I hope it inspires many others to keep fighting, no matter the obstacles."